fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Must be a dark day today because we got Mr. Joe Goldberg co-hosting.
I'm in the house.
You're in the house. Well, you better
it's
be.
13 degrees outside, and it's balmy.
Yeah, I'll tell you. You should live in Canada. It's warm.
Canada. Yeah, where are you, in the 30s? I mean,
Yeah. Tomorrow we're going into the high 40s, 50s. It's a big warm-up coming here. So
that's a dream. It's all the hot air that's floating up, north to you guys.
and there's a lot of hot air coming from there.
That's right. I'm giving it to you for free.
I'll tell you, every day we get a little bit more hot air coming out of there. Anyway, I can't say.
How about someone who doesn't write? Yeah, I'm a segregated person who doesn't write hot air.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of hot air.
Yeah, I saved it on that one.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's a good start. Anyway, well, we've got a great writer with us. His latest book, The Oligarch's Daughter, and it's a novel, is out, and it's Joseph Binder. So thank you for being here, Joe.
Great to be here, Alan. Thank you. And Joe.
I have to say, the Oligarch's Daughter and the kind of just the title is controversial.
Yeah, and weirdly timely.
Yeah. It's and not to be. As soon as you say Oligarch's Daughter, I'm thinking Ivanka, which is terrible. It's not, but it's, you know what I mean.
Right.
Just the thought that we have these thoughts going on is terrible. So, but what drew you? What's the basis of this book? What, in Joe's mind, when you started writing this, where did it come from, and what is it you were trying to say, or were you?
Well, this kind of started with the phenomenon of these Russian billionaires coming over to the West and buying up real estate and yachts and private jets and donating generously to hospitals and museums. And it seemed to me that these guys had become merchant princes, like out of the Gilded Age. So I started working on this premise. What if a regular American guy married into a family like this, married the daughter of an oligarch like that? What would happen? And then the Russians invaded Ukraine, and all of a sudden the Russian oligarchs were sanctioned, and everything was sort of off the table, and the oligarchs were non-persons. And I sort of thought, oh crap, that's the end of that book. Until I realized there's a way to do two timelines, one before the war starts and one during, that would make the book feel deeper and more interesting. So that's sort of how the premise started.
Right, and your main character, let's see, that's Paul Brightman.
Right.
So where does Paul Brightman come from with you? Like, who is he to you?
Well, Paul really started when I was trying to ask myself, how would a person get into the orbit of some crazy rich Russian billionaire in the U.S., in New York City? So I thought this would have to be somebody who worked in finance in some capacity and attracted the oligarch's attention. So I started thinking about, so who is this guy? Who's my main character? Where does he come from? Why is he interested? Why would he agree to work for the oligarch? What is the attraction? And it's not the money, because when he marries the daughter of the Russian oligarch, he has no idea at first who she is. He doesn't know she's the daughter of an oligarch. So it had to be something else. And I created a character, Paul, who came from a family that was sort of cold and desolate. His father is half crazy and he's estranged from his father. His mother dies when he's young. So he's sort of a interesting, to me, character who I thought could plausibly fall into the orbit of my oligarch.
Did the idea of Paul come first, or the oligarch idea come first?
The oligarch idea came first, and Paul sort of was created after I figured out what kind of a character I needed to interact with the oligarch. The more I wrote him, the deeper I dug into his character, the more real he became to me. So I was sort of living as Paul during the writing of this book.
Well, that was actually my question, is how it was going to be. Did you know where Paul was when you started, and how you wanted him to end up, or did he just go that direction and you just kind of followed along with him?
Well, this is sort of similar to a question that I get asked from time to time. Do you outline a book or not, right? So I have done it both ways. I've written books, thrillers, where I do no outlining, and I find that I waste months of work if I don't do some kind of an outline. But then I found, I knew Robert Ludlum, and Ludlum was a big outliner, and Ludlum told me to outline the entire book, and it would take 150 pages of single-space type pages. And I tried that with one book, and then by the time I was done with the outline, I didn't want to write the book. I was bored with it. So I sort of do something in between. I outline the first maybe 20% of the book, and then let it fly. So circling back to your question, did I know where Paul was and where he was headed? I had a sense. I'd figured out by the time I started working the book, where Paul came from, and I also figured out how this would end. But it was just all the big middle part I hadn't figured out that I sort of let myself improvise.
Well, during the process of writing this book, you said you were living as Paul in a way, like you're kind of living through him and stuff. How does that affect a writer like you at the end of it, or even during?
During, I become kind of strangely obsessed. I will be thinking that I'm in Paul's head all the time, and even when I'm not writing. So the character sort of kind of sticks with me. I will think of ideas in the middle of the night and get up and write them down. And the character just sort of takes over. It's an interesting process. I mean, when you're deeply into a main character like that, the character, I think, can stay with you throughout the writing process.
Right. It's like you hear his voice, right? Like he's talking.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And do they let you drive during these times? Just wondering.
Just wondering, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I guess nowadays you could just walk down the street and talk to yourself, or in a coffee shop, everyone thinks you're talking online somewhere.
Right.
So
exactly. You're not a crazy person.
Yeah, you can get away with it.
Hey, Joe, can I go back to the word oligarch? I mean,
yeah.
Did you have any consternation using that word?
Yeah.
In the title before the whole oligarch thing took off?
Yes.
In the public?
Yeah, good question. This was always the oligarch's daughter, and I had a talk with my agent about it, and then with my editor, and at first we were concerned that nobody would know what that word meant. That would therefore make it not a good title. But we kind of risked it and decided to use the word oligarch in the title. And then all of a sudden, oligarchs become like the most searched word on Google. So people all of a sudden were knowing what that word meant. I mean, so what does an oligarch mean? An oligarch, really, it means a rule by the few. It doesn't necessarily mean rule by the rich, but that's what it's come to mean, is that very, very rich people are running the government. And that is starting to happen in the U.S., and for a while it happened in Russia. The difference is that when Putin took over, I mean, Putin was elected because of money thrown into his political campaign by Russian oligarchs. They elected him, they kind of created him, and then shortly after he took over, he called all the richest men in Russia together for a meeting in the Kremlin and told them that they had, if they wanted to keep their money and their yachts and their jets and all of that, they would have to give up involvement in politics. Stay in your lane, he told them. And just to prove his point, he then arrested the richest man in Russia and put him on trial for corruption and sent him to the Gulag for 10 years. And the other oligarchs got the point. So the oligarchs in Russia stay out of politics, unlike our oligarchs.
Who end up at the inauguration sitting in the front row.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, but writing into this subject, it's a sensitive topic in a way, but it's something that's very controversial. Does it sort of put you on the edge, or do you kind of have to watch your step, or do you feel like, especially now that you're out promoting the book and talking on media, Are you a little worried about any sort of pushback?
Well, sure. I basically try to stay out of politics when I'm on the road. This is not a political book. This is a narrative about a guy and about a very rich family and what that's like. So I mostly try to avoid it. I have found that most of my readers sort of go with me on that journey. They don't sort of try to engage in politics. It does happen. I had an interesting exchange at a signing on my book tour last week or 10 days ago, where I was talking about my sources in the CIA and the FBI, and he raised his hand. He said, I don't trust them. And he said, in any way, Russia is now our friend. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to get involved in the politics there, but I kind of struggled with that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant, because people nowadays are looking for it.
Yep.
And they're looking to find out where you stand.
Exactly.
And it's either with us or against us for whatever team they're on.
Right.
And ironic, I sort of find myself doing that as well, because we get tons of agents sending people that, to be on the show and stuff, and I go through, and a lot of times I immediately go to their Twitter account and see see what kind of person they are. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, that's not right either, but one thing leads to another. It's just a reaction.
Yeah. People are very, very polarized and political these days. I think of my books as escapes from all that. They're entertainment. They're meant to take you away, create this world in which you can immerse yourself and get away from the politics of the day.
But I can't help but think there's a subtext, because it's so relevant to today, and it's still important, that you kind of have I don't know, it might be total entertainment, but is there something you wanted people to take away from the book, or is it just, no, it just, whatever it is, it is?
Yeah, I don't feel like I write to communicate a message or a political point of view. I want people to be drained and terrified at certain points when they read my books. I want them to be fascinated, but I don't necessarily want to engage them in a political argument. That's sort of not why I do this. I do this for entertainment reasons.
Joe, I was going to ask a question about, you wrote this book in 2 timelines. I was wondering kind of how you did that and why you did that.
Well, so, the 2 timelines thing turned out to be an interesting narrative decision in this book. I wanted to show my main oligarch, a guy named Arkady Galkin. I wanted to show him in his prime, in, having great power and wealth and exercising it and showing it off. And then I wanted us to see him hunted and no longer rich. And I wanted to get a sense of that. So I knew by doing the 2 timelines, we would have a chance to do that. And I gotta say, it was not easy. At first I tried to alternate. I tried to write a scene 6 years ago and then write a scene today and go back and forth. And it wasn't working until I realized I would have to write one entire timeline, the 6 years ago one, and then the present day one, and then find a way to weave these 2 together so that we move from one chapter to the next and it makes sense. And that is a difficult feat of engineering in terms of writing a story, because you're taking these 2 different timelines and you want one chapter to follow the next one and make sense that we're following, that we're going in this direction. So that was a little tricky.
Well, let me stay on the process question, because everybody knows how you write or have read enough. You take chapters they're very important to you.
Yeah.
And you have your 3 words that you use which you can describe your chapters. How do you, with those 3 words, that's got to be really difficult to piece all those different chapters together.
Yeah.
What is it? It's like a reverse,
reveal, surprise.
Reveal, surprise.
Right. Every chapter's got to do one of those 3 things. So each chapter has to do narrative work and advance the plot and surprise the reader. Each chapter is important. And also I believe in keeping my chapters as short as possible, because I think that given our attention spans, and mine has shrunk in the age of the internet and Twitter and Facebook and TV and all that, I think that people prefer shorter chapters. So I really want somebody to read a chapter late at night and just say, it's late, but this next chapter is only 3 pages. I can do that. And get sort of hooked in to finishing the book.
And go out and buy another book, right?
Yeah. Mine, preferably.
Exactly. It's like, well, that's a given. That was
Order another book. Dialogue. How do you create dialogue? How do you work with dialogue in a case like this with your characters? And do you have any challenges with certain characters over others, like, females, or is it a Russian dialogue? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it different? Is it more difficult, or do you have a certain process for that?
Dialogue, for me, comes very easy. I just get the characters' voices in my head. But I worked a lot on the dialogue of Arkady, because he speaks English with a heavy Russian accent. And I wanted him to sound that way in the book, but not sound cartoony, By the way, auditioned readers for the audiobook, and I had them all read a chapter from the book in Arkady's voice. And I picked the one who sounded most like a Russian. I mean, I know a lot of Russians. I used to visit there a lot. I went to graduate school. I know plenty of Russian emigres, and I know how they talk. And I wanted to make sure that this guy could sound like a Russian and not sound like a cartoon character.
You hear the voice of your characters. Do you also picture a character? Do you kind of have, what does Paul look like?
I usually do. Well, I have to tell you that I have to admit that Paul, I don't have him cast in my head. I mean, we have sold the TV rights to this book for a miniseries, and I have no idea who they should cast or who they will cast. I know what Arkady looks like. I know what Tatyana, the daughter, looks like, but I don't really know what Paul looks like. But when I was writing a book of mine called High Crimes, I had a picture of Morgan Freeman taped above my computer because I wanted to get his voice in my head. And then they cast Morgan Freeman in the movie of High Crimes. And that was sort of perfect and kind of surreal moment for me.
I think Joe's available if...
Yeah. You have a cast for an overweight Jewish guy from Iowa. I'll pick that one. But I do the same thing. I had a Harvey Keitel and Mila Kunis and a couple other people taped along, visualizing who they are. I can hear speaking their voice. I think it works. There's some authors who don't like that at all. They don't want to know what they look like.
I know.
It's interesting.
I know it is interesting. But Paul, in my case, Paul was so much in my head. He was so much me that I couldn't picture him as anybody else.
Oh, I want to ask a question off of the book specifically. I wrote espionage thrillers, and I kind of moved more towards domestic. I'm working on chugging through now. Mm-hmm. What about the genre of thrillers? I know this is a point of discussion amongst when I was at the conferences, like about where's the genre going, And so I just kind of wanted, since you're a founder of ITW and all that, what is your idea of what's happening to the thriller world for those who are out there trying to write thrillers?
So in terms of the spy novel, do you mean? Or
start with spy novels.
Yeah, spy novels are in an interesting place right now. I mean, there was a time, my first book was sort of a post-Cold War novel called The Moscow Club. And then we went into the 90s, and people did not want to read about Russia. And the Cold War was over, and we were done with that. So I think spy novels authors of spy novels like John le Carré would write books set in different settings, Africa, the Caribbean, Panama, whatever. The spy novel with Russia as an antagonist was sort of out of favor. And then it kind of went back into favor after Russia invaded Ukraine and became villains once again. But today, I think that Americans don't know what to think about Russia. I mean, on the one hand, they've got Trump talking about how much Putin wants to settle this war, how much he wants peace, and how Zelensky the president of Ukraine is a crook. We hear that, and yet those of us who are around long enough to know what happened when the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2014 do not think of Putin as a peacemaker. We think of him as a bad guy. And I think of Putin as a bad guy. I think he's a perfect villain, actually. He's very rich, for one thing.
Stole the oligarch's money.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's quite a subject. What do you makes a good book? Like, what keeps you reading a book?
Mm-hmm. Characters are the most important thing. I want characters to be people I believe and people I in some way admire. I'm talking about the main characters in the book. So character is really important to me. Pacing is very important in a thriller. You can't get bogged down, but you can't have it all be all action. You've got to intersperse action scenes with scenes that are quieter, more contemplative, to let the reader catch their breath. So character and pacing, I think, are the two most important aspects of writing a good thriller.
Well, I want to ask your approach, and you said action scene. I remember when I started writing, I would get stuck. I heard someone said, if you get stuck, just go kill somebody.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a famous. So I was just wondering, what is your approach to action or violence or the big words, sex and things like that, especially since you mentioned action? Let's start with action.
I don't do a lot of action scenes. My books are not like the Jack Reacher series where a guy is always beating up somebody else. Lee Child did terrific action scenes, luckily. I do fewer. I sort of feel that it has to make sense in terms of my character. I don't want to just randomly have a character beat up or fight somebody or run. I want there to be a reason why my character is on the run. In one entire timeline in my book, the one that takes place in the present day, is a chase novel. We've got this guy getting into trouble and then going on the run, running away from Russian oligarchs and the FBI. That is sort of one very long action scene, which I intersperse with the timeline from 6 years ago, in which we see how he meets Tatyana and falls in love with her. And that sequence is more of a love story. So I'm kind of alternating chase novel with love story.
Wow. Do you know, when you sell a book to a series like this or and to a movie and things like that, how much do you interact with that? Or if they change things or have characters in it or actors that you maybe didn't have in mind, do you get involved in that, or do you just sit back and let it happen?
Well, legally, I don't really have any power. I mean, once you cash the check, it belongs to the producer. I try not to get too hung up on what's going on. But if they ask me, in the case of the movie High Crimes, this is 20 years ago or something, a long time ago, they sent several scripts to me and I commented and I helped them out in certain scenes. In the case of the movie Paranoia with Harrison Ford and Gary Oldman that came out more recently, maybe 10 years ago, I had no involvement whatsoever. I also didn't like that movie anywhere near as much as I liked High Crimes. So, I've learned not to get too involved in the TV or movie adaptation of the book. You got to leave it to the experts. Let these people who do it for a living adapt the book. If they have trouble or if they're struggling with something, I'm always happy to help them out. But pretty much, I try to stay out of their way and just hope that I'll be lucky and I'll get a good adaptation out of it. In the case of the Oligarch's Daughter, the guy who is adapting it is a very accomplished showrunner in Hollywood, and I'm pretty confident he's going to do a really good job. So I think I'm going to get lucky one more time.
Well, let's step back before that into the writing process, because everybody who's writing, including myself, says, "Oh, my book or my thing will make a great movie, a great miniseries." Netflix has all that time.
Yeah.
Does writing your book and writing for a movie, does it come into play at all as you're doing the book writing process? Do you say, "Oh, I need to write this differently," or think about this maybe in the movie way? I know you probably don't, but I know a lot of people probably do.
Yeah, good question. I used to think in terms of movies when I was writing my books until High Crimes was adapted, and I saw how many changes they made and what they kept and what they couldn't do, and I realized that we novelists have this superpower that screenwriters do not have, which is we can be inside a character's head. And in a movie or a TV series, you can't do that. So that kind of liberated me. So that now when I write my books, I don't worry about whether they will turn into a TV series or a movie. I just write them, and I'm in the character's head a lot, and I'm not ignorant of the process. I do hope that I'll be able to sell it to Hollywood, but I don't let that dictate the book. I mean, we've all read thrillers that read as if they were screenplays. You know, they're written for the screen. And I think you lose something when you do it that way. You're giving up the power, the superpower of being inside the main character's head. So I don't let the TV or movie adaptation process take over when I'm writing anymore.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Let me ask another process question. Sort of like, this is a standalone book. You got the Heller series. What do you find the difference between writing the series and writing the standalones? Yeah. They're actually very different kinds of books. Standalones, in a standalone novel, you can take a character and turn his world upside down and completely put him through a nightmare and have him emerge from that. You can't do that with a series novel because you want your character to be plausibly involved in the next adventure. So series novels are more about investigations, often death investigations, homicide investigations. So it's a different kind of plot line that you write. I love writing series. I love writing my Nick Heller series. Right now I'm writing a new series with a character who I'm quite sure is going to continue to the next book. And it's a different kind of story than the standalone story in Oligarch's Daughter. But it's a character who I can see living another day and surviving these adventures and plausibly getting involved in another adventure in the next book. Well, let me go back then. My very first question is, when you have a new series a new book coming out, or a new series coming out.
Yeah.
Did you think of the character that can live through a series, or did you have a story in mind saying, I need to make a character who can live through a series?
I thought first of who my character would be. I wanted a character who I knew would be good in the long haul. So once I had figured out who my character is, I then figured out what adventure I would send him on. So it started with character in that case, not with the plot.
Standalone was plot and series was character.
Exactly.
I'm writing that down. For the next
He's learning how to write a book here.
Yeah. I've been working on this book forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I know the feeling.
Wow.
Female first person.
Yeah. By the way, I've been asked, so how do you write a female character? Do you feel?
I'll ask, how do you write a female character?
Right. And my answer is, look, I've written assassins. I've written murderers. Why could I not write a woman? So I think that's crazy talk. I think that basically, if you're a writer, you can do it.
I go back to the Terry Pratchett quote. I think he said, I've said this before on the show, is I don't write women, I write people.
Yeah, that's a good quote. You're writing a person, and if you write a woman character as if she was you, it's going to work out okay. I mean, of course there are character changes you've got to make in terms of if you're showing a relationship between a man and a woman, the woman's going to react differently and see different things. And so in that case, I will talk to women, whether it's my wife or my daughter, to ask them, what would you do hypothetically in a situation like this? How would you respond? So that's kind of research, right? So yeah, I write the women characters as if they were just people. And, then I'll do additional research to make sure that they sound like women to my readers.
There you go. Joe, now do you have social media, website? Do you like to interact with readers?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook as Joseph Finder. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky. And I've got a website, and I get a lot of emails, actually. And I answer them all. I mean, I sort of take time during the day to sort of carve time out and answer my emails. I sort of think of it as a privilege that somebody is motivated enough to write to the author and ask a question. So it's my job to answer those questions.
I'm following you on Blue Sky now.
Cool.
Very second.
I just dumped Twitter, so I'm not in there anymore. So
I can't dump it.
yeah, well,
I get it. It's kind of it's a weird place now.
Yeah.
yeah, and I kind of found it not to be as productive as it used to be.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
You know, and so many writers aren't on there anymore, and you post the shows and they're not there, and the reactions were very limited, whereas I remember years ago we used to get lots of, you know, you get a couple hundred different reactions, and now it's, you know,
Yep.
5 or 6, and yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah.
It wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
I start teaching my social media class next week, and I can't get away from Twitter. Actually, I'm going to tell my class, if I wasn't teaching this class, I'd be off of social media. So
Yeah. Well, it can suck up so much of your time, and it can take your creative work time away. So I try to sort of limit the time I spend on social media. I mean, I consider that sort of part of the marketing job of what I do. So I've got to do it, but I don't want to let it bleed into my writing time.
And I'm sure it can affect your mood too, right? If you,
Oh, yeah.
So it's not always good.
Right.
Well, everyone, we appreciate you being here. The Oligarch's Daughter, it's a novel, and Joseph Finder is our guest. Thank you very much.
Great to be here, Al. Thank you, Joe. Yeah.
thanks, Joe.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.